focus here is really going to be on the documents, the two agreed statements, and particularly the theological issues that arise from them. And I'll conclude my remarks with one final statement. Look at the dates of the documents, 1989 and 1990. These documents were intended to lead to the reestablishment of communion between the two families of churches. Since then, very little has happened. So, Madame Chaillot, I'm leaving you with a can of worms to deal with.
Thank you for being here.
Well, good evening. I'm very happy to meet you tonight because I believe that the dialogue is not only at the level of the theologians who were mentioned already, great names on the side of the Oriental Orthodox, on the side of the Eastern Orthodox. They have tried their very best for years. Some of these texts have been published, for instance, by the Review of Holy Cross in Boston. I have put together some of these texts from 1964 to 1993 in a book entitled Towards Unity. I had much hope in that time, I must say. And then I know that Father Fitzgerald, also from Holy Cross, has published a book with a long article as introduction to the dialogue. And well, this is the book which I have published, which as editor, which came out in November 2016, the dialogue between the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox churches, published in Volos Academy in Greece. And we have about 30 articles to try to answer all the questions left to continue, let's say, this dialogue and to inform the people. By the way, the title seems to be restrictive because we speak of a bilateral dialogue between two families of churches, the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox. But I mentioned on the back cover that, of course, another aim of the book is to enhance the knowledge of this dialogue in all churches for their own bilateral ecumenical dialogues with the Oriental Orthodox churches, which is the case between the Catholic and the Oriental Orthodox and the Anglican Church with the Oriental Orthodox, and other Protestant churches have had contacts. So, in fact, well, I was told that this book at the moment is the most complete file which you can find on the topic, because we have several well-known theologians speaking of different topics. I don't want to name them now or to give the title of their articles, but I just want to say, first of all, that this cover design, of steps in a Coptic monastery were just a symbolism to say that the wooden gate bears a cross. It is closed but capable of being opened for dialogue and for climbing the steps towards unity with knowledge, work, humility, and love. And this is what I propose as a program for tonight and for all the readers of this book, because in fact, the more I speak with people who are in favor of the dialogue or who may refuse at all this dialogue for different reasons, I see that these people are not well informed, and they repeat things which have been written down or said in different churches for 15 centuries, but without really studying the matter. And I think that the dialogue can go on only with a deeper dialogue, and especially, by studying the texts, by studying all these patristic texts and writings, especially by Cyril of Alexandria, Dioscoros, and Dioscoros of Alexandria, Severus of Antioch, because they are the two church fathers who were anathemized, And so, you know, when I read some people saying that mentioning Maximus the Confessor, who of course was against Severus of Antioch, well, my question is, my comment is that he just repeated what was said and written before him, but I have great doubts that Maximus has ever read Severus of Antioch, even if Severus of Antioch has written in Greek, not in Syriac, a little in Syriac, but mostly in Greek. He was the most prominent theologian of his time. And I think that we have to be honest enough, you know, to revise our concepts about Chalcedon, because we speak of Chalcedon, and we must be courageous enough to ask certain questions in order to go forward, because just to repeat what has been said and written before us is, I think, vain and is not going to bear fruits. So if we want to bear fruits for this dialogue, we have to study the matter very carefully at every level. And I don't agree for a minimalist kind of dialogue, because I'm sorry to say I have the impression that this is what the Catholic Church is doing these days with these Oriental Orthodox churches, because they have their own bilateral dialogue. And in no way we want to have compromise in the dialogue. And I say this for Eastern Orthodox who are afraid that we shall sell orthodoxy, or that we shall sell the Orthodox faith. This is not my intention in this book, and this is what is also writing Patriarch Bartholomew, my Patriarch of Constantinople. He insists himself that there should be no compromise. But not making compromises does not mean that we cannot have dialogue and that we cannot discuss. And I think this is, in fact, the most difficult thing, because, as we said before, we don't have only a theological argument to be discussed, which is this very question of Christology, and just one word, how to understand the word physis in Greek, which created so many misunderstandings. And as you know, in Greek, as in other languages, you can give different translations for the same word. And in fact, this is what happens with this word physis. So I just want to repeat the context of the controversy after Chalcedon. In fact, you know that they used a new terminology in 451, speaking of two physes, which was translated by two natures of Christ. And so the so-called Oriental Orthodox Christians refused this new terminology because they were afraid that it would create a division between the humanity and divinity of Christ. And of course, this would be the case, and I always repeat, if the Eastern Orthodox just blindly say that they believe in two natures, they may be heretics, because you must always add the next mention, which is two physes, two natures in one person. If you don't put this all together, there is a risk of heresy, you see, and this created, in fact, the misunderstanding. So not only they said in one person, but as you know, they added the four adverbs, which in fact, just to mention two, mean without separation and without mixture. And this should create the balance for a proper Orthodox Christological terminology. But as you know, it is how to speak with human words of this great mystery of the divinity and humanity of Christ. You see, it is so difficult, and apparently, they were so careful, the Oriental churches were so careful, not because there were so many heresies in the first centuries of Christianity. We have to put the whole story back in its context, in its theological context of the first centuries. And so everybody, why did we have councils? In order to express the Orthodox faith, and in order to keep this Orthodox faith, or to keep the faith Orthodox, correct. And so the Orientals refused this new terminology of Chalcedon. Well, the paradox, and so Severus of Antioch, who was, let's say, the leader in that time at the theological level, said, we remain to our father Cyril of Alexandria, and we keep his terminology, saying in Greek, mia physis. So how to understand this mia physis? To theologou, of God, the word, to express the divinity of Christ, thesarkomeni, incarnate, to express the humanity of Christ. And then I think this has to be studied also more carefully. There was a mixture. There was they changed, in fact, the word itself, because after Chalcedon, of course, we can speak of it. They were, times for trying to reunite the two families of churches, but later on, and even until recently, and some people still use very much this terminology, these Oriental churches were called monophysite, which of course has a very different connotation from miaphysite, because monophysite refers to Eutyches, and Eutyches was a heretic, because for him the humanity of Christ was swallowed by his divinity. And we must say immediately that the Oriental Orthodox churches today refuse completely to be called monophysite. They said that they reject completely Eutyches. In fact, this is clearly stated in the texts of the official dialogue, especially since 1985. And this, you will say, should clarify everything. Anyway, things are not so easy. And the paradox of all that is that, Severus was fighting to keep the terminology of Cyril of Alexandria. He was anathemized. But why? He did nothing but to continue using this terminology, this miaphysite terminology, So he is nobody but a full follower of the Christology of Cyril of Alexandria. And the paradox, as I said, is that Cyril is also a common father for the Eastern Orthodox Church. So if you understand this, which was explained in 5 minutes, where is the problem? It's clear for some people who have studied the matter carefully that it was a misunderstanding in the terminology, and that they are not monophysite, they are miaphysite, and that they are not the followers of Eutyches. By the way, there is no Eutychians today. They died long ago, So it's absolutely ridiculous to use this terminology today, which is also very offensive for the Oriental Orthodox Christians, because, it has such a pejorative connotation. So we have to be very careful, and please, when you meet a Copt, an Ethiopian, a Syrian Orthodox, or an Armenian, never tell him that he's a monophysite, because it's an insult, really, So we have to understand also at the psychological level that some words are really hurting. So we should really avoid these words orally, and even more so when we are writing texts. So you see the expression, the word is used, even I have seen it in very recent dictionaries, of the church, printed by the Catholic Church, by Fayard some years ago in Paris, So it's very unfortunate, because instead of explaining, of educating, the large public, we are just continuing, these offensive names, with these offensive names, and how to grow in the dialogue, how to grow in the understanding of the Oriental Orthodox Church's theology and Christology, if we don't inform the people. So I think that, I repeat, the most important is to inform the people. And how is that possible? In fact, when every time they met since 1985 and 1993 at the official level, first of all, they always had a communiqué of the Joint Commission about Christology, and we can come back to these communiques and statements. And then there was always a text called recommendations. So what are recommendations? They are nothing else but texts to explain to the clergy, to the people, how to have practical dialogue. And they do give some examples. They propose and they invite the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox to visit the parishes of each other. That is, to see how is the liturgy, how it is celebrated, and then, of course, the ideal is to have also a translation of the liturgy which you are following. Nowadays, they even have books with several columns, let's say Coptic, Arabic, phonetic sometimes, with an English, French translation. It's done in several of the Oriental churches today. I have seen in Europe, but as here, all the Oriental churches, parishes I have visited in the last 3 weeks in New York, New Jersey, and Canada, they all have these, how do you say, un tableau comme ça,
projection.
a screen
Projection.
in front of the iconostasis, and you can follow directly, the text in English. They do it for their young generations in order, to be pedagogic, and I think this is, of course, very important, because the liturgy is not a theater. It is a deep experience of faith and expressing one's faith. And so when you are a visitor, of course, you are able to follow yourself. Then they propose to have exchanges of theological students. And this, in fact, happened mostly from the side of the Oriental Orthodox, who for decades now, you had Ethiopians studying in Russia when it was still Soviet Unions, and also in Halki, they were, when Halki was still opened in Istanbul. You have Copts, many Copts and Syrian Orthodox who studied now in Greece, in Thessaloniki and Athens. And, I cannot give all but they studied, all these Oriental Orthodox also studied in Romania and other places. And many nowadays are studying in St. Vladimir, in New York, also in Holy Cross. And I even heard here in the Ukrainian Orthodox Seminary, they have had a Coptic student recently, you see. So doors open step by step, little by little. Then, of course, you see, you can multiply all these types of encounters with monks and nuns. We have in the book here a short interview with a Russian Orthodox monk from the Great Lavra of Kiev, who loves the Oriental Orthodox monasteries and monks. So he has visited them in Ethiopia, in Egypt, in Armenia, in the Middle East. And myself, in 1985, I had organized the philoxenia, as we called it, this friendly, sisterly meeting between two Coptic nuns who came from Egypt to Greece, and we visited together about a dozen of women's monasteries. And, well, of course, you can ask all your questions if you want, if you have questions about what I'm saying now. And there are very few Eastern Orthodox, who are doing these exchanges of programs, if I can say. But here we have the example of somebody from Belarus who is now doing a doctorate in Göttingen with Professor Tamke, and he studies Syriac and Ge'ez, and he speaks Amharic as well, and has studied several times already in Addis Ababa, including in the theological college there. So for me, this practical dialogue is so important. In fact, it's what we are doing here tonight in our little group, because I think if we leave the dialogue only at the level of the theologians, it is not enough. This is a beginning, of course. It is most important. It is needed. It is necessary. They have to meet. By the way, when we say these texts were agreed, in 1985, etc., the following years, we must be very careful, because in fact, these great theologians who took part in this dialogue, in these encounters, either of Eastern Orthodox or Oriental Orthodox, they were representatives of their patriarchates. So their duty is, in fact, to work on proposals, for the continuation or the beginning and continuation of this dialogue. And their duty then is to, and every time after every meeting, they have produced texts, which have been published, which are also in this new book. And then they have to report and give all these texts to their patriarch and synods. And the next step is for these synods to discuss the texts which they received, and to say if they agree or not. You see, this is the normal procedure, because we are not the Catholic Church where you have just one body. It's very easy going. We have 14 Eastern Orthodox and maybe 6 or so Oriental Orthodox bodies. It's much more complicated. And so the synods have to agree with this text, which was done, in fact, by the Coptic Orthodox Church. I put here the letter of Metropolitan Bishop of Damiette, who is the co-president since the beginning of the official dialogue in 1985, the co-president with to represent all the Oriental Orthodox churches. So he presented the text to the Synod of the Coptic Orthodox Church. They accepted the text, so they did their work, their homework, if I can say so. And then not only that, but after this acceptance by the Coptic Orthodox Synod, the texts were produced, were printed by the official magazine of the Coptic Orthodox Church called Keraza, which is read by all the clergy and faithful of the Coptic Orthodox Church in Egypt and in the diaspora. And I would say that this should have been done by all the synods of all the Eastern Orthodox and all the Oriental Orthodox churches. If they had done this, we would be one step forward in the dialogue, which is somehow blocked, I would say, today, and has been blocked now since 1993, that is for, more than 20 years. And, well, there are reasons we can discuss about these reasons. One of them was that Metropolitan Damaskinos, who was the co-president on the side of the Oriental, who was representing the Eastern Orthodox churches, has been working so hard. He was my bishop. He was Metropolitan of Switzerland, so I mean, he was my bishop in Geneva, in Chambézy, and he was working very hard for this dialogue. And he had a stroke, which, created problems at the practical level. And of course, he was paralyzed. I should re-begin my sentence. He was paralyzed, on the right side. He was not able to work or write or do anything any longer, but he was alive and could not be replaced. And it's only after his death that he was replaced by Metropolitan Emmanuel Adamakis, who is the Metropolitan of France. Metropolitan Adamakis himself is a very busy man because he's not only the bishop of the Greek Orthodox Church in France, he's also responsible to represent, the head of the representation of the Ecumenical Patriarchate at the European Union. In Brussels, he is also responsible for the dialogue between the Eastern Orthodox churches, for their dialogue with the Jews and with the Muslims. He is also, he was very active and busy for the dialogue in Crete about in the last council last year. He is following the Patriarch Bartholomew in many of his traveling trips. So, we can discuss also this matter. So this is why in the book I did not only put articles about Christology as such, but we have articles by specialists who can explain that Severus, as I explained quickly before, is not a heretic. He's just a full follower of St. Cyril of Alexandria, and this is what is underlined by Father Andrew Louth, who is really one of the best theologians and specialists of patristic today in the world, and also by Father John Baer, who has studied this topic. Then we have, the question of Dioscoros of Alexandria. He was anathemized only for canonical reasons, but not for his dogma. We have an article about his Christology, which is also Miaphysite, but now we have to go beyond this question and to explain that these people are not Monophysite, but we can call them, they call themselves sometimes Miaphysites. So this would be, again, a new expression or a new terminology to name them. And then, of course, we have these important questions: how to lift up the anathemas, which, are written down. So how to lift up. We have articles with proposals. We have also to understand other questions which are put in the book. We have proposals in different articles, proposals for the continuation of this dialogue, and I think that it's great time, to go beyond the misunderstandings. And now, because I was told that I have only a few minutes left for talking, I think then we have, I hope, a fruitful discussion, and please ask all your questions. And of course, if you don't agree, you must react and give your argumentations. And I think that this is now so important, that the people, who are, let's say, conservative Eastern Orthodox, because of what I see, because I have spoken now for the 30 last years with so many people, from the simple clergy to the bishops to the patriarchs of the Oriental Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox churches. And I can say that today I don't see really any problem, on the side of the Oriental Orthodox. The questions come from the Eastern Orthodox. And you know very well that they may be influenced by some monastic milieu and who are very conservative and who are afraid, as I said before, that we are going to sell our orthodoxy. I repeat, this is not what I want or what serious theologians want to do, of course. And I think that it is not enough to criticize the dialogue as a whole. We can be critical, but please, let's be positive. And how to be positive when you are critical. I think that these people who are critical have to write down, all their questions, all their criticisms, and not only they have to write down their questions, they have to write down what they want to be discussed in the future, and that is for the continuation of the dialogue. But they have a duty, I would say, also to give proposals, because I think it's too easy to criticize only, because it's a serious matter. It's the body of Christ which was divided very unfortunately in 451. And by the way, it's my opinion, and I think we have somebody here who agrees with me, that if we had not had this division of 451, Islam could have never entered so easily, so quickly the Middle East, and then the whole history of the Middle East would be different until today, with the catastrophes that we are facing even today, So I think we should not make a hasty dialogue or a hasty unity, for instance, for political or even sociological reasons, because today, we have so many problems for the Christians of the Middle East. So many of them are leaving the Middle East. So we should be quick and have a quick unity. I don't think this is the proper way, of course, to do things. But at the same time, I don't think that we must be passive, that we must be negative. And I think it's great time, if we are not informed, first of all, to be informed. But when I see people who have theological training and sometimes who are very well trained, and who do not want to discuss these matters, then I don't agree. I think this is not acceptable today, because we have to go beyond the theological misunderstandings. We have to go beyond the historic difficulties, sociological, cultural, etc. And first of all, I think I see it more and more. We have to go beyond some psychological. How would I say? Blockage. Do you say that in English? Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. In some cases, I see psychological blockage. We were told certain things, so nothing can change, and this is not orthodoxy. And this is what Pandelis Kalaitsidis is explaining in his article. Throughout the Orthodox history and theology, we always have had development of theology, a development of thinking. So it is time today, to have a new context and a new approach and a new proposal, new writings, in a very orthodox way, of course. But it's time, I remember Emmanuel Levinas speaking one day in Paris, and speaking of Midrash, it's Jewish, but never mind. He gave this definition that, comment on dit les billes? Quand on joue aux billes.
Marbles?
Marbles. You have marbles in a sack, you know, and then you shake the sack. So I wish that we could shake the minds of some Orthodox who do not want to listen to each other, you know, which for me is the most important, of course. That the first thing to do in dialogue is to listen to the other persons and not only to listen to yourself. And then, of course, most important, to be self-critical, because in fact, you know, if we come back now as a conclusion to this Council of Chalcedon, Severus was not happy that his master and teacher, Cyril of Alexandria, was not mentioned at Chalcedon. He was mentioned at the beginning of the council. Then the envoys of the Pope of Rome arrived in Chalcedon and asked this to be erased, you know. And this was a big mistake at the Council of Chalcedon, a very big mistake, which created what, you know, all the terrible schism. Not only this, but they imposed the Tome of Leo, you know. And I think, you know, Father V.C. Samuel, who was from the Malankara Church, when during the dialogue, he had questions about the Tome of Leo. And if we are honest, and if we want to listen to the other side, to the other party of the dialogue, I think we have also to be self-critical at different levels. As I mentioned, at the level of history, politics, sociology, psychology, and I think, first of all, we have to come back to the original text of Chalcedon, of the fathers I mentioned, and we must come back and we must study deeply, you know, who has read all the acts? Who here has read all the acts of the Council of Chalcedon? You? Who, at least one, who has read all the writings by Cyril of Alexandria?
All the writings, not all the writings, but the chapters and the text for the Theology.
Very good. And then who has read all Severus of Antioch? So please, I hope that tonight I give you courage to do it, and I encourage all the people here to do likewise. But you see my point? We have to go back to the text. We cannot repeat what Maximus said, you know, and to quote Maximus as a reference against the anti-Chalcedonians. You see, we have to go beyond. We have to be serious. Today we have all the tools for that. We have so many translations into English and other languages when we don't read Greek. So my shout in the desert is, please let us study and let us move forward for the sake of the dialogue. Thank you.
Well, just to try to decide on a procedure, perhaps we'll have one or two questions with short answers, and then I'd like us to look at the text. And at some point, I will play the devil's advocate and summarize the Orthodox objections to the document. But first, let's look at the document. So if there are one or two general questions, and then I said we'll get down to brass tacks and look at the actual document.
Just on the Tome of Leo.
Loudly, please.
The Tome of Leo, basically, was it something? It was to an historian in Poland, at least, according to.
It was accused.
To the Orientals,
yes.
And for the Orthodox right now, as the majority of theologians agree,
it was, I think, never discussed.
Wasn't it Father John Romanidis who demonstrated in the dialogues in Shandazi that the Tome of Leo essentially the fathers of the Council of the Fourth?
Sorry, I don't hear what you say.
Sorry. Wasn't it Father John Romanidis?
Can you speak louder, please?
Oh, sorry. Okay, was it not Father John Romanidis, a according to what I have read in the minutes of the discussions, that he tried to demonstrate that in the council, in the minutes, that the fathers of the Fourth Ecumenical Council agreed that what Leo wrote in his tome was of the same mind and of the same spirit of what Saint Cyril of Alexandria wrote.
Yes, because he said this of course, in the context of the dialogue, you know.
Yes.
But then, nevertheless, you know, there were Oriental Orthodox who have questions, you
Yeah,
know.
they
So this
have
is, but
apprehension.
this is where I think it should help us to be more flexible on the Eastern Orthodox side, because if we speak of dialogue, we cannot only impose, you know, on others, but we have to listen to the comments or the criticisms of the other side.
But I thought this was overcome. I thought this issue was resolved.
Well,
That's why I'm
everything can be overcome, you know, but I mean, I repeat, you cannot only ask the Oriental Orthodox, you know, to accept all, you know, pressures from the Eastern Orthodox. We have also to be able to listen to their criticisms.
One more question? Possibly? No? Okay. Do we want a break?
Well, I will go with one question.
Okay.
Because nobody went.
No, but there will be more opportunity. This is not the final,
Please,
the final shot.
let's
But I want to
go.
look at the
I
document.
asked last time because there was an internal debate between in the Coptic Church between Father Monk Bishop Mattel Maskin and
But you
Chaillot.
don't speak of the you don't speak of the official dialogue.
no, it was internal Coptic
In
about
Egypt.
Yeah, about Father Matthew the Poor, like we call it in English, and
Pope Shenouda.
Pope Shenouda. Do you know because I don't know the details about it.
I'm sorry, that's really out of the topic.
Yeah,
I think.
it is out of, I can speak to you about that.
Okay,
It is off the topic, although it may come up at some point, and I will mention the point at which it will come up.
Okay.
It may come up. It hasn't yet, but it may.
Mhm.
Okay, let's please 10 minutes, and then we'll reconvene. Said we will look at the document, and I will play the devil's advocate. I'll read the text. Unless let's have one of the students here. Milad.
Yeah.
Do you have the text?
I mean, this book is.
Oh,
I'm
no.
not on this one.
Okay. Someone who has the text. Yeah, please. Yeah, it's the paragraph on the right-hand side under the agreed statement. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th paragraph that starts the logos.
Okay. The Logos eternally,
Yeah.
the Logos eternally consubstantial with the Father and the Holy Spirit in His divinity, has in these last days become incarnate of the Holy Spirit and the Blessed Virgin Mary Theotokos, and thus became man, consubstantial with us in His humanity and without sin. He is true God and true man at the same time. Perfect in the divinity, perfect in his humanity, because the one she bore in her womb was at the same time fully God as well as fully human, and called the Blessed Virgin Theotokos.
The next paragraph too. Yeah.
Okay. When we speak of the composite synthesis of the Lord Jesus Christ, we do not say that in him a divine hypostasis and a human hypostasis come together. It is that the one eternal hypostasis of the second person of the Trinity has assumed our created human nature, in that act unity in with his own uncreated divine nature to form an inseparably and unconfusedly united real divine human being, the nature being distinguished from each other in complete theoria only.
Okay. So there's some very good. This is very high level Christology in this paragraph. There's some things that are very good, and there are some things that are problematic in terms of Byzantine Chalcedonian theology in this paragraph. But there are a lot of sort of buzzwords in here. Please don't carry on an independent dialogue here. There's some very definite references, historical references, theological references that. Particularly if you have studied Christology and the ecumenical councils, you will pick up what they are referring to. So, just to get some of the references in here, we have some volunteers. So what are the references, the key references that are contained in this paragraph?
There's a lot.
Well, just name one to start with. Okay, pardon?
Hypostasis.
Yes, okay.
But it starts with a Trinitarian at the beginning. The
Yes.
Logos eternally consubstantial.
Consubstantial. Where does that come from?
That's the Council of Nicaea.
It's the council. It's the famous word homoousios from the Council of Nicaea that we find in the Nicene Creed. So that is obviously not problematic. It's an acceptable word in Byzantine theology, and is part of the resolution, if you like, of the Trinitarian controversy of the 4th century. Okay, then there's another one in that paragraph.
Incarnate. And the Holy Theotokos too, who's recognized by both.
Yes, where does that come from? Historically.
Chalcedon,
No,
No.
Ephesus.
Ephesus. It's the 3rd ecumenical council. The 3rd ecumenical council gave the title Theotokos to the Mother of God. So that is also
Yes.
fine because I said it goes back to the 3rd ecumenical council. Now, the reference in the next sentence, I'll read this myself. We do not say that in him, that is in Christ, a divine hypostasis and a human hypostasis come together. What does this refer to?
Well, one of
That's,
no.
This is the 4 adjectives that we say not
No,
separate,
c'est les Nestoriens.
not saints and not.
No, the
No,
Nestorians.
this is what they are denying here is Nestorian theology, Nestorian Christology. In Nestorian Christology, there is a divine hypostasis and there is a human hypostasis who come together in Christ. So they are denying Nestorianism. This also goes back to the 3rd ecumenical council and is, again, in terms of Byzantine Christology, is not a problem. There is a problem in that sentence. It's not a direct problem, it's an indirect problem. And here I'm playing my devil's advocate. That is the word composite hypostasis. That is not familiar terminology in Byzantine theology. It's not necessarily incorrect. I'm making a distinction here between incorrect and unfamiliar. It is not familiar terminology. We will not find this typically in descriptions of Byzantine Christology. The word composite hypostasis. It's the word composite that is problematic. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just unfamiliar. So a Byzantine theologian would say, well, what is it? What is, just feel uneasy with the word. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just not a familiar word.
Excuse me. Byzantine probably would say that there is one hypostasis.
That's more
When-
typically, yes.
We speak about one person.
Yes.
Because
When it comes to theology, that's it.
Because I expected even the Copts to say composite nature, not composite hypostasis.
No, composite nature would not be wrong. It would not be right even in for the Coptic theology. No.
I thought they would, but I expected
Yes,
more.
they can. Yes, one composite nature.
Oh,
in
yes.
the sense.
Sorry. Yes, composite nature. Yeah, but here they're referring to the
Yeah,
hypostasis.
but which is weird because.
Yeah. The next sentence is even okay. The first part of the next sentence is okay. It is that the one internal hypostasis of the second person of the Trinity has assumed our created human nature. That's fine. That, again, is basically pre-Chalcedonian Christology. Uniting with it his own uncreated divine nature to form inseparably and unconfusedly, which are two of the four adverbs from the Chalcedon, united, real, divine human being. Okay. Again, the problem here is that from a Byzantine point of view, this is unfamiliar language. A united, real, divine human being. It's not the way Byzantine theology for the last 1,000 years or so has spoken with respect to Christ. The next part of the sentence, and here I'm giving critiques that have been made of this document by Orthodox theologians. You can, whether I agree or disagree with the critiques is one thing. I'm stating the critiques. The natures being distinguished from each other in contemplation only. Again, not only is this not Byzantine language, although it does occur in some fathers of the Church.
But in contemplation only is the expression of Cyril
yes,
himself,
which is part.
And this is to appease the Oriental.
But it has not been retained in Byzantine theology. Why has it not been retained in Byzantine theology, do you think?
It becomes too close. It could sound a bit like a real monophysism, or a bit like Ephesian, what's his name, the heretic.
You have to think of this really, it's almost a philosophical question.
Okay.
If it's in contemplation alone, is it real or is it not real? And that is the question. For a Byzantine theologian, he would say, well, if it's in contemplation alone, then it's not a real distinction between the human nature and the divine nature of Christ. It brings into question then the reality of the two natures. This is the critique.
Even
But
in English and in
yes.
Greek too, I mean, you say in theory.
Yeah.
It by its nature, I mean, whenever someone starts a sentence or says a sentence, in theory,
Yeah.
it's
Yes.
very different from saying in reality.
Yeah.
Yes,
or
but
in practice.
but we have to say the Greek expression is in theoria moni. Moni. So you have, it's maybe a bad translation, but it takes the words of Cyril himself,
Paul.
That was the way to balance things.
If I may, when we say in Byzantine or in Greek Orthodox theoria, we say the vision of God. We don't say theory with imagination. It is the vision of God. And this goes back even from St. Gregory's Palamas. So when the contemplation theory, this is what is
The Perhaps
Dionysius too.
yeah. So maybe
because what's the real signification in Greek, in ancient Greek, in theoria monia?
And theoria moni, that's taken from Cyril.
Yeah, I know, but like, what could it in Greek? So somebody knows the biblical Greek. No? I wonder what's the because in French it sounds.
Careful to make that attempt to identify the use of that word in this place in a particular sense of vision.
You know its context 1,500 years ago.
Yes. Well, I said we can't resolve all of the issues, but at least we want to raise them and try to understand why, in effect, the agreement has not been implemented. So we have to see what are the points in the actual statements that have caused problems. And this is what I'm trying to highlight and try to understand why people jump on these and say, well, what are we talking about? Is it a real distinction between the two natures, or is it one that we dream up ourselves? That's the issue there. Now, another paragraph we can look at here. Milad, now that we have the the text in the book, so this is on page 341 on the that we're looking at on the right-hand side, the first two paragraphs, the full paragraphs there.
So,
We agree.
341 in this book,
No, don't forget about that book.
Okay.
Il est bon ce livre-là, mais c'est l'autre.
On the right side.
Okay.
341.
Okay, both family condemned the Nestorian heresy, or
No, above.
we agree.
We agree.
We agree.
Okay, well, so we're not using the same text here. Okay.
We are
I see it.
considering.
I see.
Okay.
Sorry. We agree in condemning the Nestorian and the Ethician heresies. We neither separate nor divide the human nature in Christ. For his divine
From.
nature,
From.
in Christ. From
Yeah, the
his
little
divine
words are
nature.
important here.
Yeah, very good. Nor do we think that the former was absorbed in the latter, and thus ceased to exist.
Okay, read the second one so we don't have to.
The four adverbs used to qualify the mystery of the hypostatic union belong to our common tradition, without commingling or confusion, without change, treptos, without separation, and without division. Those among us who speak of two nature in Christ do not thereby deny their inseparable and divisible union. Those among us who speak of one united divine human nature in Christ do not thereby deny the continuing dynamic presence in Christ of the divine and of the human without change, without confusion.
Okay, let's look at the first of those two paragraphs. Again, you have to know some of the Christology and the Christological debates and heresies. We talk about the Nestorian Eutychian heresies. Rejecting, on the one hand, the separation into two hypostases, two persons in effect, as Nestorianism, or Eutychus denying the reality of the human nature of Christ. So Christine did speak to that. What they're trying to do here, in effect, is to bury the accusation of monophysitism attached to the Oriental Orthodox churches. So that's actually fine, even though historically, for a millennium, these churches were called, on the Byzantine side, they were called monophysite. But it is incorrect, and this is generally agreed to now, I think, except those who still maintain the terminology from an earlier period. But the denial of in this one little paragraph, you really have the denial of strict monophysitism.
Is it truly, strictly speaking, the Byzantine Orthodox really considered them as monophysites? Because even St. John of Damascus, when he makes a definition of what are the differences dividing the Orientals and the Orthodox, the only thing he says is that the only thing that's dividing us, they don't accept Chalcedon. He makes no reference to natures. He makes no reference to any Christological derivative or change or modification. And what's also interesting is the way the Orthodox were receiving the Miaphysites back into the folds of the church was only, not even through chrismation, only through libellum, which means to accept Chalcedon. That's the only condition.
Yes, we'll come to that.
And sorry, there is an article by Professor Marcellos about this to explain in detail.
So in the following paragraph, you have there the four adverbs from Chalcedon. Belong to our common tradition, because actually Chalcedon did not hatch ex nihilo the four adverbs. They existed before. They were simply put in there very formally in the dogmatic declaration of Chalcedon.
And sorry, but these four adverbs are to be found in the four traditions of the Oriental Orthodox in their liturgical texts and other texts.
So then there's the next sentence tries to deal delicately with the language of two natures and one nature. And this is where, from the Byzantine side, problems start to arise. Not the first part of it, which basically, when it talks about those of us who speak of two natures of Christ, which is the typical Chalcedonian language, do not thereby deny their inseparable, indivisible union. That's a fair description of the Chalcedonian side. Those among us who speak of one united divine human nature. This is typical non-Chalcedonian language.
But why do you want to have to oppose? Because we are in the
I'm not
context of
opposing.
dialogue.
I'm making
we
distinction because I'm saying
we
this
are
is the objection.
obliged to satisfy the two
Yes.
sides. So it's normal that you have a Chalcedonian or Byzantine, as you say, you have Byzantine expressions, and you have also expressions, to put the emphasis on the union to satisfy the Oriental Orthodox.
Well, it's again because what the point you mentioned right at the beginning is in Byzantine theology, physis has a very precise definition, and this is another use of the word which is not familiar to Byzantine theologians.
But
That's
anyway,
what the problem is.
it's just the Cyrillian terminology, and as we repeated again and again, it was accepted by the Chalcedonians because Cyril is. So it was part. I think we put, an accent to say, as you say tonight, this is not the Byzantine tradition, but it is the Byzantine tradition because it's Cyrillian, So you exaggerate.
I have one more argument which I was going to hold on to the end, but now that we're at this level, one of the main critiques of the two documents is that it is basically pre-Chalcedonian Christology. Now, which is fine. Everyone was agreed prior to Chalcedon. After Chalcedon, the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, carried on. You have Chalcedon, you have the Fifth Ecumenical Council and the Sixth Ecumenical Council, which also dealt with Christology. So the pre-Chalcedonian Christology, this is the argument, the pre-Chalcedonian Christology does not contain the full development of the Christology of the Eastern Orthodox tradition. So the critique of the document is that, yes, it is fine as pre-Chalcedonian Christology, but it does not incorporate the fullness of the post-Chalcedonian Byzantine tradition.
What does it mean, the fullness? For me, the fullness
means
is from the beginning, it's from alpha to omega.
Yeah.
So from the beginning, from the first councils, you have had this Christological expression, as we said, of Cyril, who is a common father and who is per excellence a Byzantine father. He's one of the most clever and fathers of the Byzantine tradition, as you call it. And I think it's because we blindly, followed what was said in Chalcedon without remembering in this alpha omega perspective, Cyril and his terminology, that we ended up with this division, and that we were not able to agree even after Chalcedon, when they were, they tried so much to find a terminology that would satisfy the two parties. And sorry to say, but for me, if we only speak of Chalcedon, then, we don't take into consideration what was before Chalcedon and which is as Byzantine as Chalcedon, and we don't take into consideration what was said in the councils after after Chalcedon for trying to solve the problems, and many theologians to say today they underline this, that we cannot concentrate when we speak of Christology and Byzantine Christology only on Chalcedon, but we have to take also in consideration, the steps and the conversations on Christology after Chalcedon. And we have to study this history of Byzantine Christology as a whole, before and after Chalcedon, and not only to put the accent on Chalcedon. And I think this is why it is so difficult for some people, which I called conservative, to have a discussion and to be more flexible in their approach, because they don't have this full approach of the Christology. They put the emphasis on Chalcedon, and they should balance this Christology before Chalcedon and after Chalcedon in the perspective of an alpha and omega. Like when Kalaitzidis, when he says that today, the Orthodox theologians should find new formulations. So I don't say that this is perfect, because nothing is perfect. We are only human beings with human words, but it's on the way, you see. And so I don't agree with this perspective of saying this is a Byzantine terminology, this is not the tradition of the Byzantine terminology, because this is exactly the approach of the people who don't want to speak of the dialogue and who don't want to go forward and who want to stick only to these two phases terminology without going forwards. Please.
He was just playing the devil advocate. Maybe you don't like.
Yes, well, I have to answer the devil. No, because this, what I say, I heard it from several theologians, who say, like McGuckin, for instance, and others, they say we have really, when now for the dialogue, we have to study also, these attempts, after Chalcedon, because this is also part of Chalcedon. It was the after Chalcedon, but it's still, so linked to Chalcedon. So we cannot just, it's not a monolith, no, comment on dit, one rock. Monolithic, terminology of two phases. Yes, we have these two phases. Nobody in the Orthodox Church will deny it, but the same Orthodox had accepted Saint Cyril as their father with his terminology, and why we had no reaction and no problem in that time, and why do we have a problem after Chalcedon? We can also ask the question in this way.
We can't blame Chalcedon on everything, because through Chalcedon now we have also the fifth, but we also have the sixth. We also have the two.
Exactly.
I mean, what you're saying is totally valid. It's just that so many good things came out of Chalcedon too. So
no, I am not criticizing. Yeah. I just say we have to study the whole matter.
I'm going to intervene here just because you mentioned the Fifth and Sixth Ecumenical Councils. One of the critiques again of the documents is that there is no direct reference to the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Ecumenical Councils. There are indirect references.
Exactly.
There are indirect references.
And I can tell you the story behind
reference. There is a direct reference to the Seventh Ecumenical Council, but not Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth. So the indirect ones, we've looked at some of these. For example, the four adverbs come straight from Chalcedon, although it is pre-Chalcedonian in its origin. There is also a reference to the theological issues from the Fifth and the Sixth, and this is in the Second Agreed Statement. Look on page 341, paragraph 3 on the right-hand side. Both families of Orthodox churches agree that the hypostasis of the Logos became composite. Again, this somewhat troublesome word. By uniting to his divine uncreated nature with its natural will and energy, which he has in common with the Father and the Holy Spirit, created human nature, which he assumed at the Incarnation and made its own with its natural will and energy. So again, this is picking up the theological notions from the Fifth and Sixth Ecumenical Councils without actually referring to the councils.
So if you allow me, I know from Metropolitan Damaskinos, because he tried his best, in fact, to have mentions of the following councils after Chalcedon to be already implemented in the text, for a future step of this dialogue, So it was they tried, to put not the full teaching, but at least the main words, of these following councils already in this text, without mentioning the councils themselves after Chalcedon, but just to show that the Oriental Orthodox accepted, the content of the following, these questions of wills and energies. I mean, in the context that if you accept one physis, as a composite nature, then you have to relate this to the two wills or two energies, but which will be understood in the same context for the Oriental Orthodox. So they tried, even not speaking of the councils after Chalcedon, they tried to push even the matter of faith after Chalcedon when they added these specific sentences.
So, further on in paragraph 4, then, again, the four adverbs, the negative adverbs from Chalcedon come up again, which is fine, and then the troublesome statement, they are distinguished in thought alone. And they said the question, as we discussed earlier, is what does that mean? Does it mean it's real or not real? By
the way, I think this is very well explained in the articles in the book. So please read the articles.
The next paragraphs I want to focus on. Let's see, who I want to pick one of the students here who can read this. Sorry, Spiros, would you like to read that? It's paragraph 8. Paragraph 8. Yeah, or section 8. There are actually two paragraphs there.
Both families accept the first three ecumenical councils, which form our common heritage. In relation to the four later councils of the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox state that for them the above points 1 through 7 are the teachings also of the four latter councils of the Orthodox Church, while the Oriental Orthodox consider this statement of the Orthodox as their interpretation. With this understanding, the Oriental Orthodox respond to it positively. In relation to the teaching of the Seventh Ecumenical Council of the Orthodox Church, the Oriental Orthodox agree that the theology and practice of the veneration of icons taught by that council are in basic agreement with the teaching and practice of the Oriental Orthodox from ancient times, long before the convening of the council, and that we have no disagreement in this regard.
So on the seventh one, and it's not an issue. The problem is the first paragraph.
And sorry, by the way, I took this paragraph about the veneration of icons, and that was my first book, and which is being translated into English, and I hope you will hear about it this year, later on. Sorry.
So again, the criticism, just to sort of raise it at another level, acceptance of the first three ecumenical councils, but the Eastern Orthodox accepts 7 ecumenical councils. The critique of the agreement and those who sort of push for the extreme position, if you like, would insist that the Oriental Orthodox must explicitly accept the 7 ecumenical councils.
Why did you use the word extreme? I mean, That's the only, it's the only thing I would take issue with you on that word. I mean,
Well, this
by
is.
using it, you're saying that it's extreme to believe that you have to
But
accept this doctrine of the seven
it's because they insist that there be explicit recognition. There is, it can be argued that there is implicit recognition contained in the document, but not explicit.
And here's the question to me, I'm sure.
So sorry, just to say that Metropolitan Damaskinos and his team were hoping that this implicit, acceptation would be enough. But of course, as you know, some Eastern Orthodox have reacted sometimes very strongly, And then, of course, what would you propose? I mean, it's a part of their history. It would be very simple, I think, to say yes, because they have accepted, the content of these of all these ecumenical councils. Apparently, the content does not create any problem, but the recognition of the councils as such is not so easy, to accept for the Oriental Orthodox. It's a question of history. It's their history, It would be like a denial of somehow of their history. It's to impose something on them. So we come back to psychology, So it's a very sensitive question, and I don't have an answer for that. Do you have an answer? If you were an Oriental Orthodox.
I have a question, and the question is, talking about the seven councils, do you believe that it's possible to come to any sort of union or reunification without an acceptance of the seven councils?
That's the question that's on
It
the
is
table.
not-
That's the question that I'm asking you
well,
as a participant.
it is-
Do you believe it's possible?
It is not impossible. It could be possible, but I see with all the reactions of the Eastern Orthodox at several levels that they will never accept any compromise. We were speaking before of compromise. Compromising. They will. Sorry.
Is it the patriarch that
Yeah.
said no compromise?
In the introduction.
Yes. So how to solve this? You see. So, but because they
You
feel.
say we agree on content, but yet we cannot sign on to because we feel pressured. And
Well-
I can't help but think that there's a certain amount in that statement of pride and
Pride on which side?
On
On
both sides.
both
This
sides.
is the
On both
this is the
sides.
question,
Pride and stubbornness on both sides.
Thank you.
And then I would point out that we didn't read the seventh point, and then in combination, just as a historian, if I were to open this 200 years from now, or maybe 1,000 years from now, and say, well, here's an agreed statement that's made, that we're going to continue to use our terminology, you're going to continue to use your terminology, and there's no problem with that, we've agreed, and that we've always maintained and had the same authentic belief from the beginning of time. So for 1,500 years, it's just a little misunderstanding on a word, and you can continue to call it one thing, we can continue to call another, and so we're still brothers.
As long as we believe that we have the same Christological faith, you see, and this is the intention of this dialogue, and this is the intention of these texts, which are not perfect. We could have added some little words, not me, but this is why now we can either see this text with a positive eyes, and we say, well, could we adjust this text? Could we add this or that? And this is what I said before. Please, people who are critical, please present proposals to make better understanding for this dialogue, Or we can speak forever, because this text will never be perfect. And we can argue, and we can disagree, and we can criticize this text, forever. So I think this is also the weakness of the Orthodox, that they want to discuss forever, but I think between no criticism, and accept blindly, and and make criticism forever, we also have to agree that there is, a limit sometimes, somewhere, and that we must agree with the weakness of human words and balance some formulations, make some proposals for some additions, for some changes, or, but not to do it forever.
Father Andrew.
Years ago, I heard that Pope Shenouda had proposed that he would be willing to step down and that there would be one patriarch in Africa for Coptic and Eastern Orthodox. All would be united. I heard this years ago, and I'm asking Christine here, or you, Dr. Paul, to give me historical clarification. What I also heard was that the Coptic Holy Synod declined Pope Shenouda and didn't go along with him.
What do you mean decline?
They rejected
Refusé.
his proposal.
Ils ont refusé la proposition.
This is what I heard, that Shenouda
No.
was willing to say, okay, let's be all together, but his Holy Synod
No.
reacted.
Well, you are speaking of something which was signed by Pope Shenouda in Rome in 71, I think, and which was never accepted by the Holy Synod of the Coptic Orthodox Church. But sorry to say, for this text of the dialogue between Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox, the Holy Synod has agreed, and in fact, I put here the letter written by Metropolitan Bishoy of Damiette, who used to be the secretary of the Synod of the Coptic Orthodox Church. So we have the document here, to testify this.
Sorry, I want to just go back to the first paragraph here under section 8. It talks about the 3 councils and the 4 later councils. Unfortunately, in the English, which is the main working text, there are 2 ambiguous statements, which doesn't help at all in such an important text where the language has to be extremely precise. And this is while the part there that's in italics. These italics, by the way, are mine. They're not in the original text. The Oriental Orthodox consider the statement of the Orthodox as their interpretation. It's not clear to whom the word "their" refers to. Grammatically, it should refer to the Orthodox. But does it refer to the Oriental Orthodox? It said in the English it is not clear. I said if you take a grammatical analysis, you have to take the word that immediately precedes it, which would be the Orthodox. But is it intended that "there" refers to the Oriental Orthodox? So whose interpretation are we talking about? That's one ambiguity.
Wasn't the original language in English for this text?
It was all in English because
Yeah, but
today
said-
all these official dialogues
so
of all the churches are all in English, not any longer
So
in
grammatically,
Greek.
the only interpretation that can be given then is it refers to the Orthodox. It doesn't refer to the Oriental Orthodox. But in that case, it doesn't have
But
much
in
meaning.
the context, I think we understand. Even
Well, we can't understand
but-
because we have to read the grammar as it is written.
Well, so
And
you have
that's why I
to
said-
ask Father George Dragas because he was the one
That's why I said there is
who
an
corrected
ambiguity
the English
in the
of these
language.
texts.
His English is not that strong. The second ambiguity, well, it's not really an ambiguity. It's just that personally, I don't understand what it means. And that's the second sentence. With this understanding, the Oriental Orthodox respond to it positively.
I think what they're saying is, what I understood from this part is that the Oriental Orthodox accept that in this dialogue, or in this how we call it, in this agreement, the other ecumenical council are implicitly explained. So if this is what we as Orthodox mean by the 4th, 5th, and 6th council, it means that they approve of it. If we can use this if you use these words as division without separation, and that they are distinguished only in thought alone, if we agree with that, that's what we mean, then they agree with us that they accept the council without saying it.
Yes, but as we pointed out earlier, the expression "in thought alone" is itself problematic.
Not. I think if you know Greek, patristic Greek, and when you read the articles, I think this is clearly explained.
The last point I want to take up on this agreement is in paragraph 10, where are we now in readings? Alexandros, if you'd like to read paragraph 10 there on page 342.
Both families agree that all the anathemas and condemnations of the past which now divide us should be lifted by the churches, in order that the last obstacle to full unity and communion to our two families can be removed by the grace and power of God. Both families agree that the lifting of anathemas and condemnations will be consummated on the basis that the councils of fathers previously anathematized or condemned are not heretical. We therefore.
Okay, then there's the next one is just sort of practical steps, but the key paragraph is that one. So, comments on this?
Only the cops got rid of the anathemas.
Only the cops?
The Coptic Church?
No.
Both the churches. Since you said earlier that they agreed the statements.
No, yeah, but this has not been implemented.
Parce que les cops sont obligés d'attendre après les autres de toute façon.
Right. Yeah, just to clarify sort of the formal status of the agreed statements. On the Orthodox side, only 3 churches have formally accepted these. This is Alexandria, Antioch, and Romania. Now, it's interesting that even the Ecumenical Patriarchate has not formally endorsed the agreed statements. So, the anathemas. It looks very easy, and of course there is a major precedent for it that I mentioned earlier this evening, which is?
Well, the Pope and the Cardinals, no?
Yes, between the anathemas arising from 1204 were formally lifted even prior to the conclusion of a dialogue between the Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church.
Which is absurd at the ecclesiological level.
Yes. This is. But it was done to, I think, to clear the way to permit the dialogue to go forward.
We should reverse the order. We should lift the anathemas towards the Orientals and restore the anathemas because it makes no sense the way it is right now.
So what is the problem here? I mean, apart from the sequence that we've just been discussing here, what is the problem here from the Byzantine side of it, and why is this criticized?
Well, I heard it. I mean, I heard it once from a Coptic priest that she says like we cannot consider our saint as heretics. Like we cannot listen to other people saying that Siberius is a saint, and then the other church they consider it as heretics. And so they cannot accept that. And I heard maybe the same thing. The problem was some saints, like for example Maximus the Confessor, consider as a saint, they consider as a negative person. I mean negatively. So things like that is people that we venerate and they don't venerate, and some of their bishops that they venerate and we don't venerate, and we insult even.
And yeah, I mean that's basically what the issue is. It's not so simple as it might seem. One of the questions, Christine did allude to it earlier, but I'll bring it out on the table. Were they anathemized because for disciplinary reasons or for heresy? And there is an ongoing debate, even within Orthodox circles, on this question. And the two main personalities concerned are Dioscorus of Alexandria, died in 454, and so one of the persona of the Second Council of Ephesus in 449, and the Council of Chalcedon 2 years later in 451, and Severus of Antioch. Those are the two main personalities concerned because they are explicitly named not only in ecumenical councils, and it's not only the fourth, but they're also named in the fifth and sixth ecumenical councils, and condemned by later ecumenical councils. Now, in addition, they also feature in Orthodox liturgical texts, notably in the Synodicon that we read a few Sundays ago, and also in the sorry, I don't have the reference here, the Sunday of the Ecumenical Councils, where they are named specifically as heretics. So it's not only a question of sort of going back through the history books and wiping out something in history. These are liturgical texts, and those of you who know something of the history of liturgical texts in the Byzantine tradition, there is no procedure for amending liturgical texts in the Orthodox tradition. So and as you point out, are we now suddenly going to go back and say that, well, for the last 1,000 years, these people have been called heretics, and now suddenly they're saints? And vice versa. The same applies on the other side. So
Well,
it's not a simple, straightforward thing, because those of you, again, who know something of the history, there have been schisms over the attempts to modify liturgical texts. Particularly in Russia, the old believers schism was basically caused by an attempt to amend liturgical texts. So these things churn around in the minds of those who have to make decisions on these things. So it's not as simple as saying we will now abolish these anathemas, because it implies rewriting long-standing texts. And they said there's no procedure for doing this.
Of course, I understand that it's not a simple thing, of course, but in the context of the dialogue, if we agree after 15 centuries, which is a very long time, of course, that we finally agree that we have a common Christology, it implies that we have to make some adaptations. And of course, it concerns different fields, including the anathemas, which are not only found in the canons, in canonical texts, but also in the liturgical text. And these matters cannot be solved in one night, of course, and this is why they have several sub-commissions in the dialogue, and they have a specific commission to work about the liturgical text, and to have proposals. So you say we cannot change, of course, Orthodoxy is not changing a iota, but at the same time, we have to put, if the dialogue is really growing, that everything is becoming clear, and if we understand that there is no Christological difference in faith, dogma, which is what is the most important thing in the Orthodox Church, then I think the Orthodox, well, not me, sorry, it's I should quote Bishop Metropolitan Damaskinos, saying that it's a duty, to go forward and to heal this wound of so many centuries. We cannot continue and say, well, yes, we have the same Christology, but you see, we are not going to change anything in the liturgical text because they were used for 15 centuries. There is a responsibility, to heal all that. And then, of course, it is difficult, but this is where, with our human words, we have to find ways for this healing, also at the level of the liturgical text, you see. And I try to find quickly, because I did not know that I had you see that is in the article by Metropolitan Damaskinos in the book. The ministry of the unity of the church, and this unity, do we want it or we don't want it? If we don't want it, we have to say this clearly from the beginning. If we want to make efforts, we have also to be consequent and to be active in that direction. So the ministry of the unity of the church is a witness to faith. So we agree, we all agree, the Oriental Orthodox do agree as well, that the faith is first and no compromise for dogmas, as it is constantly confessed in the Creed. And then the next question, the next sentence to answer your remark. Any quarrelsome theological disposition or diminished sensitivity at the prospect of restoration of ecclesial unity, when there is an official declaration of full agreement on the right faith, which is what we discussed, should be regarded as unthinkable and certainly as reflecting a false understanding of the operation of the mystery of the Church in the history of salvation. And I think this is important. We have to reflect on the mystery of the Church in the history of salvation, and not, with arguments which are very human and very important, I don't say the contrary, but which can be amended, adapted in full orthodoxy, of course, according to the Orthodox tradition. It is difficult, but it is not impossible. At the same time, if we put an obstacle, because we should change and remove in some liturgical texts and other texts the fact that Severos and Dioskoros are anathemas, after we have understood all what we discussed tonight, is not honest. Because if you begin to garden a plot of land and you want to clean only one corner and you don't want to clean the whole garden, then of course the bad weeds will come up all the time. So at one time you must decide if you want to clean the whole garden or not, in the perspective of the history of salvation and of the unity of the Church.
So this commission and these documents are remarkable.
They tried to answer the questions which we discussed. I agree that we can discuss a few points. That's also I am not as severe as you are, but that's why I reacted strongly, maybe. But I think we have to be positive, because if we are only, critical, we go nowhere. We must be critical, but we must have a positive critical attitude. Please.
If my 2 cents worth here. As I said, I was playing the devil's advocate by putting forward, stating the arguments that have been raised against the agreements. And this is why the agreements have been sitting on the shelf for the last 25 years.
There are also other reasons. By the way, Metropolitan, because for instance, the holy monks of Mount Athos have criticized, these texts, and Metropolitan Damaskinos has answered them in several articles. Unfortunately, it was too thick already, 450 pages, to add these articles, but you can find them in Episcopsis, which, was the paper of Chambézy, and where these letters of Mount Athos were, they were translated into Greek, they were and other languages. English. You find them on internet also, with etc. So, but I must say, Metropolitan Damaskinos has tried his best, his very best, and people were much more open-minded, we must say, in 1960s, when the unofficial dialogue began, and also in the 1970s. I can tell you, because Pope Shenouda told me himself, that they were hoping to have a quick unity with the Eastern Orthodox. They were dreaming of this unity, and then they were how can I say, disappointed, can we say that? Because they saw that there was no result, there was no effect, there was nothing coming forward. We must add to the fact I explained before that Bishop, when Metropolitan Damaskinus had the stroke, everything was stopped, etc. So that is one reason or one excuse. We must take into consideration the political situation in the Middle East. When the patriarchs of the Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox churches have their faithful being killed, kidnapped, living as refugees, leaving the Middle East forever, how do you want to ask them to take time to discuss of theology and Christology? So this is also an aspect to take into consideration, and I think it's also, well, you have also the evolution of certain synods, the mentalities of their bishops, which have changed. It is clear that the Eastern Orthodox were much more open-minded and ecumenical-minded 30, 40 years ago than today. We see it very well with the texts of the Council of Crete last year in 2016. So, it's a general attitude of the Eastern Orthodox also, which is not very helpful for continuing, bilateral dialogues like the one we are discussing tonight. And to say the truth, my hope is with the coming generation, and this is why I insist we have to inform the people. They have to read, they have to discuss, they have to meet each other with the Oriental Orthodox. But you see, first of all, we have to meet among the Eastern Orthodox. We have to agree and to be one among the Eastern Orthodox. So an Armenian bishop recently said, what can we do for the dialogue, for our bilateral dialogue? You don't even agree between the Eastern Orthodox patriarchates. So you see, we have to see in our own situation, to be united ourselves before we try to be united with other churches.
I know there are still two more questions, and I'll deal with those, but I want to make one last point myself before, it's not a direct criticism of either points, but to me it is something fundamental which is lacking. And this is that there is no apophatic reference in either document. I have to point to a very similar dialogue which was carried on by the Anglican Church with the Oriental Orthodox churches, which again has an agreed statement very similar to these statements. But in that statement we have the following paragraph, just 3 lines. We recognize the limit of all theological language and the philosophical terminology of which it makes and has made use. We are unable to net, very strange word to use in English. This is from the Anglican Oriental Orthodox, it's not in this document, from the Anglican Oriental Orthodox Theological Dialogue Agreed Statement. I'll read it again. We recognize the limit of all theological language and the philosophical terminology of which it makes and has made use. We are unable to net and confine the mystery of God's utter self-giving in the incarnation of the divine Word in an ineffable, inexpressible, and mysterious union of the divinity and humanity which we worship and adore. So it is a very clear apophatic reference. We cannot, in human words, whether they are the Oriental Orthodox words or the Eastern Orthodox words, fully capture the divine mystery of the Incarnation. An explicit recognition of that. And I think perhaps this is very much something in any future dialogue that it would be essential to recognize this right off the bat, as was done in the Anglican Oriental Orthodox, but unfortunately not in the Eastern Oriental Orthodox dialogue.
And I think this is possible because the tradition of the Byzantine church or churches, because they had all their cultural impact with the centuries, and of the Oriental Orthodox, because both families, they do have theologians who are poets and who have as much as possible, they have used also poetic forms, Also, you have to read the liturgical text, of these Oriental Orthodox churches to understand their Christology, which speaks all the time of Christ being fully God and fully man, without separation and without mixture, and of the Virgin Theotokos, etc. And they sing all that with beautiful words, which are poems, liturgical poems, and I think, yes, it would be helpful to quote also all these fathers, all these texts of the liturgy and of the patristic text of the two families.
Father Andrew.
We've talked about the, just learning here, we've talked about the three, you said three, I want to get them right, patriarchates that signed on: Alexandria, Antioch, and Romania. Did I hear correctly? Yeah. Now, please, what about the Oriental? We've talked about the Coptic signing on and publishing. Did the Armenians sign on? Did the Syriacs sign on? Did the Ethiopians sign on? And did the Indian, the Malankara, not the other one, did any of them sign on this statement yet?
No.
What's the answer?
No, there was officially no. Just there were, I don't think so.
Not that I'm aware of either.
But they have, there was this agreement, pastoral agreements in Damascus between the Syrian Orthodox and Greek Orthodox of Antioch. So it's accepted, but it's accepted without any written text,
But their synods didn't, because we've been talking about how the
I am not
take
aware.
synodal action, but to be fair, the Orientals haven't all taken synodal action. Let's be fair here, right?
So it was really the Coptic Church which has really written down, and as I said, it was also shared with the clergy and laity in the Keraza, in the church magazine. Do you have
there was a
comment?
question here.
Well, my question was that the considering about the lifting of the anathemas and the discussions, I mean, definitely something to consider. Of course, Dioscoros was basically...
Louder, please.
Dioscoros was also, I'm referring about the lifting of the anathemas, and of course, Dioscoros was included somehow with Eptichios, and he became the unfortunate Dioscoros according to the canons. He became the unfortunate, not the heretical, the unfortunate Dioscoros of Alexandria. The implications of lifting the anathemas go beyond just these persons of Severus, Dioscoros. The implications go to Pyrrhus and all the fathers, or the ones we refer to as heretics, who were supporting the monoenergism and monothelitism as well. So we also have to examine them then. So
of course.
There's a lot more implications, because it basically sets an entire imbalance for the subsequent councils, right, at least to the Sixth Ecumenical Council. There's a lot to look there and to have to set the imbalance, and it's maybe of all these personalities, of course, Dioscoros might be the easiest to exonerate, but you can't. I haven't read Severus, so I can't speak about him. I have no opinion. All I can see is a certain critique about his writings. There's questions, but as far as this whole debate with Maximus, the confessor, and everything, that it goes beyond just that superficial condemnation of Dioscoros in the Council of Chalcedon.
So about Dioscoros, you can read this article by Elias Kesmiris, who spent 5 years of his life, to read Dioscoros.
Montathus released this. This is the confusion. There's a lot of noise about this, because Montathus also responded to these PhD dissertations of these persons.
Yes.
So there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of confusion.
Yes.
So,
yes. Yes, and I think that it's also time, because you mentioned Mount Athos, I think it's time that these people also will read in depth these texts of Severus, of Dioscoros, because we cannot kill people, just with words, unless we have studied the matter really seriously. And I don't think this is the case for what you just mentioned. And we had, you should read also the thesis of Nicolopoulos on Severus of Antioch, who also spent 5 years. And I think it's I have the greatest respect, of course, for the monks of Mount Athos, but they are not how many have really been trained theologically speaking, So I think again we have to balance all these things and not just be polemical just for the sake of polemics, This is what hurts me so much, that the Orthodox, become so violent on internet and in different ways. And I think at least we could discuss these matters in a decent way, as we are Christians, and we have to discuss in peace. We can discuss everything, but not with a lot of yes, who makes much noise? Not the people who are in favor of the unfortunately, not the people in favor of the dialogue. The people, a group of people who are very polemical and known to be very polemical. And I don't want to give names tonight. One of them now was criticized and has to ask forgiveness from his bishop in Thessaloniki. So I think that it's time also to answer people who are too polemical, and these people, they have to study. This is my first argumentation from the beginning of my talk tonight, and they have to know the matter properly, because when we have professors of Oxford and the great universities in Germany and elsewhere in the world who have, like Father McGuckin, who spent all his life, studying Cyril, I don't think anybody on Mount Athos has spent so many years like him, So also we have to trust people like Father McGuckin or Sebastian Brock in Oxford, and not pretend that we know better than them, because they have spent their life for these studies. So at one time, at one point, we have just to be humble, to say, well, we don't agree, but let's discuss and let us study. Like you said, you have never studied Severus of Antioch. He has a miaphysite terminology. So as long as you understand this and you accept this, and that he's just the follower of Cyril, whom we accept, then where is the problem, please?
So if this is the case, then why not? How am I to answer tomorrow someone who asked me, well, if we agree, we were at an election last night, bro, and we agreed that we agreed. So why not just sign the pronouncement of the 4th through the 7th ecumenical councils? If we agree,
we have to push.
Then is it not valid commentary or criticism then from the Orthodox, the Eastern Orthodox side, to say, well, yeah, look, if we agree, then what is it easier to move the reality of the dogmatic pronouncements of the first 7 ecumenical councils, or to say, you know what? Maybe we should. I understand that we agree on the same thing, so we don't have a problem with this council.
Mm-hmm.
What is easier?
So it is complicated because we are a monolithic tradition. We don't like any things to be changed, and here you understand that there must be some changes, some amendments.
So many things from the Orthodox side.
Well, you can say so many, but you can say some.
What is one council for them, really? Because
well,
for them it's just one council.
I think Christine did speak to this earlier. I mean, there is 15 centuries of history, which is as difficult for the Oriental Orthodox to change as it is for the Byzantine Orthodox to change.
I'm saying that.
But it's this is where the problem is.
I'm speaking as devil's advocate. I mean, tomorrow I wish all this disappeared. It's not that. It's just that we cannot self-castigate ourselves all the time that it's our fault.
No.
It's not them, it's us. You know, because what we're doing like that is we're creating schisms and divisions among the Orthodox because of this situation. And
this is a problem, of course.
We speak now in a language, oh, you're an ecumenist, oh, you're a fundamentalist. And all of a sudden we have ecumenists and a fundamentalist, and there's no moderation in the language we speak because we're bickering between ourselves. And this is creating division with our church in the end. In trying to unite with those who are truly Orthodox, we're going to end up being split as a church.
It is a danger, and I think it is why some patriarchs, you know, are so careful and are not going forward. It's one more thing to put on the list. And please, because you seem to understand the whole situation, my question: what would be your proposals?
My personal proposal is that this event of Champs-Élysées, and there's an enormous event, and very that's my evaluation. This is just a breakthrough that we've been looking for, but we need to be patient. We need to be patient, and we need to work with them and then with us to build the trust, because we have to build trust. Mm-hmm. And the fact is that there's lack of trust in both sides. We can't just sit there and pluck our hair out amongst ourselves as Orthodox and distrust ourselves and our common sense just for the sake of, you know, having an ideological argument. Because it's becoming ideological now. Mm-hmm. This is the problem. This is the danger. This is my personal belief, is that everything that we're experiencing now since the Council of Crete has really become an ideological argument. So what we really need to work on is how we're going to build this trust between the two families of the churches. It will take time, and we have to trust that.
And how to build this trust, please?
More dialogue, more studies.
More academic studies. We should have sent more Orthodox to study the Armenians
and they have to catch up. I mean, as far as their contact with the study of the Cappadocian Fathers, I mean, they have to send more theologians to understand their terminology. They have to do some catch up as well, and we have to catch up with them, and it needs time. I mean, it's not a process that's going to happen overnight.
Speaking of time, we have run out of time. So I'd like to thank our speaker.
Sorry, one last word. This is what Father Routier in Quebec, in Laval University, and we are in their local.
This is the Dean of the Faculty of Theology at Laval.
And he's a specialist of Vatican II and a disciple of Father Congar, who was so, you know, efficient at the Vatican II, and I asked him what do you say, what to do for ecumenical dialogues in general, and I repeat what he said. He said that Father Congar said, work, work, work. So, but I wanted a word by Dr. Goodin, please, to finish. Please give us your advice. What is your advice?
With that, Timios is going to walk out, which is perfect. No, I think I'll just echo or build upon something that Paul had mentioned, the apophatic element. I mean, going back to the truth-loving Plato, finding words appropriate to the divine. You know, that's what this language is about. Finding words appropriate to a mystery that is ineffable. And it serves two purposes, one of which is to adorn a mystery with beauty. And that's wonderful. And the other is to protect against error that can lead to heresy, to the opinions that are not correct. But a lot of this dispute, and I need to go back and read Cyril, admittedly, is, are we protected against heresies or creating heresies amongst friends? You know, this type of language, the Oriental Orthodox are not trying to claim Jesus was a demigod or a superhuman. There's not a heresy I can detect in this from my perspective. They're not falling into Nestorian this or, you know, Marcionite that. the ineffable mystery, words appropriate to divine, and how this language is being used. And I guess I mentioned to you right before, even Gregory of Nyssa warns that even our concepts can become idols, more important to us than God. And so who are we actually worshiping here? The creations of our own thought, or the actual mystery of the encounter with the Theandros? So, I mean, there's much to digest here, and of course I'm oversimplifying because I'm taking up time here. But I'll just say I agree. And leave it at that.
Way to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.